So today, we are going to continue, we're going to continue our series on identity. We're going to continue our looking into who we are at our deepest levels. Our interest in this series is in our stories. We listen to our stories. We get bound up in our narratives. Last week, we explored the basic idea that beneath what we tell ourselves about ourselves, what we believe that others tell us about us, is a deep truth, which is our connection with our source. It's who we are in our most fundamental being as children of God, children of the light, where the peace is, where the joy is, where the strength is, where the support is, where we can always go. And sometimes we get deflected by what we tell ourselves about ourselves, what other people tell us, the self-rejection, the feeling that that is not what we deserve. So what I want to look at in this series is how we get more often to connect with our peaceful center, which comes from Source. What we discussed last week is that we are more than our diagnoses. We are more than our clinical presentations. We are more than our moods. But we need to be aware of this. We need to consciously look at it. Because what we believe about ourselves, and we talked about this last week, what we believe about ourselves, sometimes we don't even think about it. But it defines our perceptions. It defines how we look at the world. It defines how we invite the world to treat us. Don't we find that to be true? What we think about ourselves sets the stage for how we think life is going to treat us. So it really behooves us to take a look at that, because as Asha just sang, we deserve more than that. But we're not going to get it until we know it. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about our stories, about how we identify what our stories our stories are. Okay, so now you had homework. Remember I gave you homework? This is way fun. I know sometimes it's just the teachers who get to give homework, but no, I got to give some homework. So the homework for last week was to think about what your stories are. Just to take some time and think about, what do I tell myself about? I'm a lawyer, I'm a minister, I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm impatient, I'm an introvert. I get mad when I drive on 400. All those are narratives and stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. I'm not good enough. I don't deserve that. Did anybody have just a little time and think about some of that this week? Because it helps to be aware of what it is we're telling ourselves about ourselves. Keep those stories in mind as we continue to explore this topic today. So as we go, what we're going to explore is that our stories can propel us forward. What we tell ourselves can make us better, can make us stronger, can unleash capacities we didn't know we had. They can also hold us back. They can diminish us. They can fill us with fear. They can cause us not to take that step. What was the story I told last week about how I was an introvert, and so I spent years not doing things, not getting up, not going to parties, not making friends, because I thought I don't do that. I'm an introvert, I don't deserve that. Well, I was wrong. Even if I am an introvert, I still deserve that. So that's a story on top of a story. But it helps to be aware of what we tell ourselves about ourselves. So let's talk about story for a little bit. Humans have always communicated by story. It's how we communicate. Ever since we were sitting around the fires, wearing skins, trying to avoid being eaten by something. We have always communicated by story, by anecdote. In my law practice, I used to talk to witnesses and I would say, tell me quickly what your feeling is about this event. And always, 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 I didn't get a narrative of the feeling, I got a story about what happened. I got an anecdote. It used to drive me nuts. But people need to tell their stories. Don't you find that? It's how we communicate. It's how we express how we felt at the time. It's how we draw people into our experience. Not only do we communicate what happened, we communicate how we felt about it. We communicate how that we were heroes, or we were scared, or that we were excited. We don't just say what happened. We communicate the whole experience by story. Don't we do that? Doesn't each and every one of us do that? We are born storytellers, because not only do we want to communicate what happened, we want the other person to share how we felt. That's how we function as people in community. We are born storytellers. We exaggerate, we embellish. I used to have a boss who would talk about how many trials he had won and all his wonderful law, courtroom expertise. And he would joke and say every time he told the story, he had won more trials. Because every time he talked, things got better. The story was embellished. He was just telling stories. And sometimes the stories may not even be factually accurate. I heard a description of somebody describing stories in the Bible. And there's a debate whether stories in the Bible are literate or they're basically metaphor, they're literal or they're metaphors. And the way the person put it was, I don't know if this actually happened, but I know it's true. What do you think about that? I don't know if it actually happened, but I know it's true. Because what it's trying to communicate is a truth about human condition, about human emotions, about human interactions, about our aspirations as we reach for God. That is true. It may not matter if the Red Sea parted or if folks were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years by actual count. What is true is the human experience behind it that is communicated by the story. Do you see what I mean? I love that. I don't know if it happened, but I know it's true. So, as I was preparing this talk, I ran across an article from the American Psychological Association. The article was called Our Stories Ourselves. And it spoke about the importance of our stories to our own growth, to our definition of ourselves, to how we shape the world, how we look at the world, how we approach the world in the future. Because what it said is that our stories are important in communicating what happened, but they can also shape how we step forward into our future. They can shape our outlook, how we hope, how we despair. They are kind of harbingers of how we are down the road. She told one story about a young woman who was disabled. She was a disability activist who was boarding a plane. And she was trying to pre-board and she was having some problems. The flight attendant was not letting her on and she was having problems getting on the plane. So what happened is the flight attendant all of a sudden called attention to this lady's cane, and she very loudly said, "Please stand aside, this little girl is handicapped." And, okay, so at that moment, the young woman had a choice. She could feel excluded, she could feel humiliated. She had a choice as to how she took that. As she told this story, she turned it around. She turned it into a story of victory, of triumph, of courage. Because she got on that plane, she buckled her seatbelt, and she said to herself, I am going to make this flight. I can do this. I do not deserve that. Probably what she was thinking. And she did. And so that became her story. She had the choice as to how to look at that event. And she turned it into one of strength. Now, the next time she was faced with a challenge, that attitude carries over. She's already got her story. No matter what happens, I can do that. I am bigger than this. I am stronger than this. I will triumph. And she carries that into her future interactions because that is the story as she has made it. She turned it into what served her, what brought her into her strength, what showed her her true capacities. She also had a choice to turn it into a story of defeat, of humiliation, of, oh, I'm handicapped, I can't do that. But she didn't. The author of the APA piece called this a redemptive story. She said, the author's name was Sadie Dingfelder, in case you want to look up the article. But she turned it into two different types of stories. One was a redemption sequence, which is what this story was, which is when people craft an event and they turn it into stories of triumph and victory. The other one is called a contamination sequence. So my vote is that I get to do redemption stories. But the contamination sequence is when you have something that happens and you turn it into defeat. You turn it into loss. You turn it into, oh, that's all I deserve. I guess I just won't be able to do this anymore, so I'm not even going to try. Our narratives, this is an example, this redemption story is an example of how our narratives propel us into further growth, to show our strength, to show our courage, to show our resilience. And these are ways we can shape our own life experience. Let me give you a personal story. This is the other thing I found out, is when you are speaking, the first thing they always tell you to involve your audience is tell a personal story. Why? Because people love personal stories. How many of you have listened to speakers who kind of drone on forever and never tell a personal story? Don't you just feel like throwing something? Yes, because it's like we want to hear about you. We want to connect. That's how we connect, is through our personal stories. So, when I was a younger lawyer, I worked in some litigation which was very contentious. There was a lot of money in it. I worked for a major auto parts manufacturer, and it was very mean. They were just mean. And because I think they were mean because there was a lot of money involved. And whenever you can make a lot of money, people just kind of lose their minds. And so these folks on the other side were mean. I was defending the auto manufacturer, and the other folks were defending folks who were suing them for injuries or deaths arising out of the use of this product. Okay. So I would have to go into these hearings, and I would have to get into big fights with these other lawyers, and I would sometimes feel just not up to it. I would just like feel, oh my God, I've got to be on my toes, standing for 5 hours, arguing, knowing all the facts, being, I'm like the only defense this company has against some horrible result. And sometimes I didn't really feel up to it. I felt weak, I felt small, I felt tired, I felt unsure. So I made up a story. I said, I'm not going to be me. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to be Nick's mom. Yeah, I'm going to be Evan's mom. I'm going to be Catherine's mom. I'm going to be the way they see me. I'm going to walk in there and be the person they see. It made a huge difference. I grew like 2 feet on the spot. I got a backbone, I got a voice, I got the ability to articulate because I changed my story. I wasn't weak, I wasn't scared, I was somebody wonderful because I looked at myself the way they saw me. Okay, that was when they were younger. I've stopped doing that, that's all I'm saying. Think of your own. We have to be aware of how sometimes the stories of self-rejection get in our way. The story that Linda read about, the en renouement, the toughest thing we can do is believe the stories that result in us thinking that we are not enough. Before the service, I was talking to Asha, and she was talking about a TV special that she had seen, and it was about a young woman who was transgender and the problems that she was having going through that transition and getting the support of her family. And she put herself through terrible emotional contortions and pain, attempting to be a person that she was not. And the lesson she took from it was the greatest violence that is inflicted on us is not violence done by another, it's the violence we do to ourselves when we are not true to who we are. When we are not true to who we are. And that's one of the inquiries that I encourage you to make as we go through this series, is we are figuring out on the deepest level who we are. And how do we listen to that voice within, the source within, that enables us to be true to our own true north. Because that's where we find peace and strength and courage and truth, isn't it? Not in what other people tell us, in what we know, what we hear. The powers of our stories that we tell ourselves have huge power either way, to lift us up or to hold us back. Dr. John Holmes, a psychology professor at the University of Waterloo in Canada, teaches that, quote, for better or worse, stories are a very powerful source of self-persuasion, and they are highly internally consistent. He writes, evidence that doesn't fit the story is going to be left behind. Okay, don't we know that to be true? Yes, because you know what we've learned here. We don't go out and gather facts and then believe what we see. We believe something and then we see what supports it. So our stories, this is why it's so important that our stories lift us up. that we take the events of our lives and use them in true ways to craft our ability to prevail, to triumph, to keep going, to keep growing. Negative narratives tend to become true. Let's say you're telling stories about your spouse. You're complaining about your spouse or about your friend. The more you tell those stories, the more negative, I see people smiling, that's all I'm saying. The more negative things you find about that person. The more you complain, isn't this true? The more you complain about somebody, the more negativity you feel about that person. You're talking yourself into it, don't you?
Yes.
But the minute you start finding ways to appreciate that person, to love that person, to remark on little things they do, little wonderful things that drew you to them in the first place, you start to see the wonderful person you met. And it's all what you're saying to yourself. There was an article a little bit back about, and I'm not even sure I'm going to get the name right, but it's 2 minutes that you're supposed to do during the day, which will really improve your outlook. Have any of you heard of those? Okay. It's to take 2 minutes and be grateful. And not just grateful for health or for the fact that I live in this country or the fact that I have 3 wonderful kids. No, it's be grateful for something particular. I am very grateful that my family is here from London. I'm so glad to see them. They come, they're all sitting in that row. They come once a year, and I am blessed that they are here.
So are we.
Yeah, thank you. I am grateful for specific things. My sister did the dishes last night. Okay, I didn't have to. Small thing, but it was a huge thing then. Little things like that pick us up. Another little 2-minute bit that is helpful to pick you up is to do something nice for somebody every day. Do something nice for somebody else and don't expect thanks. Don't even expect recognition. But it just feeds our souls. Don't we find that to be true? And I know this is a community that does this in spades. They absolutely do. We go out and we do nice things for people a lot. Correct? Yeah, because it feeds us and it contributes to the peace and the joy of our world. So, what is the theme you are sensing here about our stories? The theme is awareness, knowing what it is we tell ourselves about ourselves, knowing what it is that we believe others are telling us about us. It's awareness. You know, it's funny, but as a speaker you say there's really only one talk. The 2 words are love and awareness. And I could just get up every week and say that. Love and awareness. And you can add compassion and peace and joy, and you've got a full talk. But it's being aware of what we are thinking, being aware of what is going on around us. That is how we know whether the stories we're telling ourselves are true or whether they are what we talked about last week. Remember we talked about the primal lie? Separation, fear, despair, the primal truth being that we are children of the One. We can do no wrong. We are always loved, we are always supported, we are always held. That is who we are in our very essence. The primal lie is that we are separate, we are not good enough, we have to make up, we have deficits that will just never be fixed. That's the awareness that we need to have. Which do we want to tune into? Which will make us happy? Which will bring us peace? That's the challenge of being aware as we consider ourselves walking through the day. Maya Angelou wrote a wonderful book of essays. And I don't know if anybody's read it, but it's called, her essay book is called Wouldn't Take Nothing for My Journey Now. Has anybody heard of that? I love that book of essays. They're very short. It's called Wouldn't Take Nothing for My Journey Now. And it's based on the biblical quote that you'll find in John 3, I think, where the disciples going out are instructed to take nothing for the journey because everything they have will be provided for them. They don't want to step forward in fear. They want to step forward in the feeling of abundance and prosperity. So they take a staff and they head out the door and they go. In this essay book, she wrote a story called Further New Directions. And it was about an experience that happened to her when she was 16. She writes, some people who exist sparingly on the mean side of the hill are threatened by those who also live in the shadows but who celebrate the light. It seems easier to lie prone than to press against the law of gravity and raise the body onto its feet and persist in remaining vertical. Isn't that great? I just love the way she wrote. Sometimes it's easier just to lay down and say, I can't do this, than stand up and say, yes, I can. Anyway, she writes that she was fired from a job when she was 16 and she was just devastated. Her entire personal worth was on the line because she was fired from this job. She was sobbing. She was on her bed just sobbing and wailing, but she kept the door open because she wanted her mother to hear her. So her mother went upstairs and she asked Maya why she was crying. And she said, I got fired, this is what happened. Her mother's face suddenly became radiant with indulgent smiles. Fired? Fired? She laughed. What the hell is that? Nothing. Tomorrow you'll go looking for another job. That's all. And she took the story of defeat, my whole life is over, I mean nothing to anybody. And it's like, get over it. You're going to go look for another job. Turn your story around. And she also said, the mother also said, so what? Remember you were looking for a job when you found the one you just lost. So you'll be looking for a job one more time. And then she added a plus. And think about it. If you ever get fired again, the boss won't be getting a cherry. You've been through it once and survived. Not only will you get through it, it was a good thing. That is the power of changing our stories around a little bit. Another element you might have noticed about your stories, as you were doing your homework this week, notice I'm not calling for a show of hands, is that you will find that your stories change. One of the benefits about telling good stories about yourself, about making positive stories about yourself, is that it brings out different aspects of your personality because our life roles change. Each different role gives us a chance to find out new capacities, new strengths, new abilities to shine that we didn't think we had. Last week we were talking about Wayne Mueller's book, How Then Shall We Live? And one of the points he makes is that our concept of self changes. When we get frozen in a certain concept of ourselves, that's when we stop growing. When we get frozen, it's when we shut down. He gives the example of Zen monasteries. In a Zen monastery, there are different functions that need to be fulfilled. There's the gardener, there's the cook, there's the disciplinarian, there's the guy who takes care of the zendo, there is the head of the monastery. Every couple of years, the people who were assigned to different tasks shift. So when the guy was a cook, he learned to be a nurturer. He learned to feed. He learned to be a caring person. He exhibited that part of his personality. Then, in 2 years, he stops being the cook, and he goes into being the disciplinarian. So instead of being nurturing and peaceful and loving, he's got to hit people over the head when they go to sleep during meditation. And a whole different part of his personality emerges. Someone who is strict is now calling upon nurturing parts of himself. Somebody who is nurturing now puts that aside and has to be strict. The concept of self needs to change, because what happens when that happens is you realize that the notion you had of who you are, of your innate abilities, expands because you are in a different role. Does that ever happen to you? Do you find yourself, you can go through life changes, you can retire, you can get divorced, you can get married, you can have a child, your role all of a sudden changes. And when that happens, your stories change. You find different aspects of yourself that call on different strengths, if you have the patience to look. If you get over being mad, if you get over being upset that you're now in this different role. I had another story. Okay. One of the things I don't like to do is cook. Okay, so now you're getting a long laundry list of things I don't like to do. I don't like to cook. So I had to cook the other day because my wife was busy, so it was my job to spend approximately 16 hours getting dinner ready. Okay. All right, well that's a bad, she doesn't watch these, so this is good. And so I was feeling hostile because I had as part of my story that I don't cook, she cooks. She's a much better cook. She's been doing it for 20 years. And so I'm sitting here chopping stuff up, and I am running a tape that tells myself I should not be doing this. I just should not be doing this. And then I thought, I stepped back and I thought, what is my assumption behind this? That she should be doing it? that this is not my job, that I do not participate in this way. And I had the opportunity to step back and kind of think, what am I learning about myself from standing here chopping chicken thighs, which parenthetically are not easy to fix, so I don't recommend you try them. But I learned patience. I kind of got behind the notion of service. And because I stopped and because I thought, it brought out my understanding that these were qualities I had that maybe I needed to pay a little more attention to, because I had changed my role. I was not sitting at a desk anymore. I was not being the lawyer, the minister, or whatever. I was being the cook. And my job right then was to serve and nurture and bring out those parts of my personality that maybe I didn't think of all that much. Has anybody ever had experiences like that? Those are valuable things. There's a reason where they're doing those things. It's to stop and think. Who am I to think that I am too busy to cook or too busy to care? No. It helped me expand my notion of who I was and my ability to connect in this world. And I also didn't kill anybody, which was the good news. When they ate. So Mueller has an exercise in his book. He calls it the Who Am I exercise. Is anybody familiar with this? What he says, and just think about this, I'm not going to give homework because that was a dismal failure, but think about this during the week. This is a voluntary exercise. Okay. During the course of your day, as you go through your activities, as you talk to friends, as you go to work, as you do whatever, ask yourself the following questions. Who am I right now? As you're sitting in the car, who am I as I'm driving up 400? As you're talking to a coworker, who am I in this? Am I the leader? Am I the follower? Am I the nurturer? Am I the instructor? Think about your interactions in each part of your day and just ask yourself, who am I being? What qualities in myself are being called upon in this interaction? The point is to explore the breadth of who you are, because our goal in our discussions about identity is to get back to what Merton called that hidden wholeness. Remember we talked about that? To get back to who we are at our very depths. And one of the ways we do that is by appreciating all the different parts of our personality, all the wonderful attributes we have that sometimes only come out when we're in different situations and we think about them. So as the week goes on, think about the Who Am I exercise and watch how your sense of self may change. As you're on 400, you may be mad, you may be aggressive, you may want to inquire why you're feeling that way. When you're in work talking to a coworker, maybe somebody who comes to you with a problem, you're being nurturing, you're being supportive, you're being loving. These are all aspects of your personality that when you merge them, when you accept them and you embrace them, bring you closer to that hidden wholeness which is at your very center. So I encourage you to do that just in the week coming up. He also tells the story about a guy named Jeff. And this is in his book, How Then Shall We Live? And this is a wonderful example about how sometimes the stories we tell ourselves, our narratives that we spin out, are just not correct. They don't lead us forward. This guy was very quiet. He liked solitude. He did not like big crowds. He got nourished by being alone, by just being by himself. But he lived in our culture where we are told that it is normal to be gregarious. If you don't like going to a party, there's something wrong with you. Get out, make friends, have a drink, happy hour, get out there, let's go. That's what people do. And he just never fit in. And it made him feel bad about himself. He was going through some self-rejection. So he went to a psychologist. And the psychologist suggested that he was depressed. Sent him to a psychiatrist who put him on medication because he was depressed. Now wait a minute. So then he goes to Wayne Mueller, which was the first call he should have made, frankly, in my book. And Wayne Mueller says, what is it you like to do? And he says, I just like to be by myself. You know, his work took him into groups, and he got nourished from stepping back and being alone. And Mueller said, you're not depressed, you just like being alone. And the guy was like, thank God. And so he was able to take that story that he had told himself about himself, that he was not normal, that he was clinically depressed and he needed to be on medication. And he just said, no, that's just not who I am. I just get nourished from time by myself. And it freed him up to probably do a little more than he had before. It gave him strength in knowing who he was, that this was not abnormal. This was something that just nourished him. So the story he had been telling himself was not accurate. So the point is, our stories can be wrong, and that's why we need to think about them. It would have been way helpful if he had said to the first psychologist, no, I just like being alone, and I'm not depressed, so thank you very much. But he bought into it. And so we need to be aware of when we do that, when we buy into the stories that do not move us forward. We don't have the opportunity always to choose the circumstances of our lives, to choose the life events that happen to us, but we do have the opportunity about how we are going to interpret them, how we are going to tell them, how we are going to use them as motivations for going forward. We do always have that opportunity. We can tell ourselves if we are in defeat or if we triumph. We can be redemptive or not. We can approach our stories with awareness, honesty, and courage. So this week, take a look at that who am I exercise. Every now and then, just ask yourself, who am I being right now? What qualities are being called upon right now for me in this interaction? Do they move me forward? Do I feel better? Is this interaction, is what I'm showing giving me peace, making me feel better about myself? Is this who I came here to be? And just try to be aware of that as you go through your week. The more interactions we have in which our true self is reflected, the love we have, the peace that we emanate, the qualities that we admire about ourselves and others, those lead us back to wholeness, to the source within. I want to leave you with a quote by Jules Renard, which I really like. And he writes, "If I had to live my life over again, I would ask that not a thing be changed, but that my eyes be opened wider." Not a thing be changed, but that my eyes be opened wider. Let's take these thoughts into